Emotions are messages that want to be received. And if we try to ignore them and push them away, they just get stronger. If we can just give them a little bit of attention and care, learn when our emotions are trying to help us and to listen to them, and when our emotions are trying to misguide us, and those are the times we want to regulate, I think that people out there would feel much better about their lives. Therapy is about helping a person drop the parts of themselves they don't want to become the person who they want to be.
I looked up your book, and I wanted to find it. If it was on, I hope at some point it's on Audible. I don't know if you're planning on doing an audiobook release. Is that a possibility?
It's a possibility. I hope that happens, but this is a small publisher, and so I think they have to see that the book's doing okay before they greenlight an audiobook. But I'm hoping that is a project I get to do this fall.
Nice. Well, give me a little bit of background into the book itself. I understand that it's about emotions, regulating emotions, the power of emotions in mental health. Give me, if you would, a background of the book, and then perhaps even before that, it's been a minute since we've caught up, and by a minute I mean 30 years. Tell me a little bit about your professional life, your professional journey, and maybe how that led you into the creation of this book. And feel free to pause along the way. I might jump in with questions, make it as free form as you wish. But just trying to get a sense for your journey with psychology. I've seen references to psychotherapy, and of course, drama still comes in along the way. And what led you eventually to this book on emotions.
Yeah, so I was always a theater kid, as you know. And I majored in theater when I was an undergrad with the intention of becoming a stage director or a playwright. And I did a little bit of theater after college, but found the networking aspect of theater really hard. I don't like schmoozing. And so I went back to one of my professors from college, and I asked what I should do with my life. I was probably, 21 at the time. And I said, I'd like to be a theater director, I think, or I could be a casting agent, or I could be a playwright. What do you think I should do? And he just looked at me and said, it's not about what you want to do, it's about what you have to do. And I was like, okay, that's interesting. What do you mean by that? And he said, theater is too hard of a career path to follow. If you feel like you can do anything else, maybe you should do that, because you have to need it, feel like you can't breathe without it, to pursue this path. And I was like, maybe I don't. I love theater, but maybe I don't need theater. Maybe there's other things that I can do. And
I've heard that before, that notion of if you can see yourself doing anything else, theater's a hard life to find success, find a career in. So at that point, that was towards the end of your undergrad, or that was beginning of grad school?
It was a couple years after undergrad, before I figured out psychology, and that was the moment that moved me towards psychology, because I started thinking about, what do I love about theater? And maybe that there's something that I could follow sort of underneath the performing or directing. And so I started to think about what I loved, and I was a directing major in college, and one of the things I really loved is helping an actor shed themselves to become a character. It's one of the things I liked about acting too. It's like getting to drop the me and pick up this character who's not me. And so I thought, well, maybe that's therapy. Maybe that therapy is about helping a person drop the parts of themselves they don't want to become the person who they want to be.
On your journey, Jen, are there things along the way, personal experiences that you've had where there were parts of your you that you have evolved or worked on to the point where you would say you have developed the character of Jen and removed some of those things? What are there any things that you have worked on personally in your psychological journey of the character of Jen that you added or took away from in your character sketch?
At that time, I hadn't. Since, absolutely. I did some therapy in undergrad and found that really lacking. Every time I've sought therapy, it's been for relationship problems. And I think I spent all of high school kind of pining for people who didn't like me back romantically, including you, by the way.
Ah, okay.
And I really wanted to try to, like, not just be the person who was unrequited, right? And so I realized about myself that I tended to find myself drawn to people who were emotionally unavailable, and that I didn't really like people who liked me. And so I had to really work on that and what it would mean to be with somebody who was kind and treated me well, which I was always sort of suspicious of before I kind of did a lot of that emotional work.
So definitely that notion that I'm thinking of that famous joke. I wouldn't want to belong to a club that would have me as a member. That sense of feeling relatable to anybody, myself included. That if somebody is interested in you, they must not be worth your time, because why would they be interested in me? And so underneath that, I feel like, isn't there a sense of low self-esteem or low self-worth or less than feeling of that?
I've thought a lot about that. I don't think so. I think it's, for me, I like a challenge. And so if I think back about some of my crushes early on, or some of the relationships I've had, there's something about the feeling of yearning and like just wanting. And when somebody wants me more than I want them, I don't get that. And so I don't think it was low self-esteem, actually. Maybe flits of that at times, but really it was that I didn't get that feeling of wanting.
And so is that something that you mentioned you worked on some things? Now it's interesting because I'm hearing what you're saying. It's like, I feel like if your self-esteem is healthy, but it's the yearning that you want, is there something that has to change about that? Or is that just something that is a personal preference? Like the heart wants what it wants, as it were. You want to reach out for that person, and kind of basically that longing is, I mean, what's the end of that story, Jen? Like, do you decide that it's healthy to be interested in someone who is equally interested in you, or is it like, is it that, well, that's how I operate. I wanna reach above. I want to reach above and convince somebody. Is that romantic still? Where are you at with that now?
I'm divorced and married. And so I think after I got divorced, which is when I was in grad school, I, was in therapy, trying to navigate kind of new relationships. And I met my current husband when I lived in Albuquerque for my internship at the end of grad school. And he's a super nice guy, and I was a little suspicious of that at first. But he didn't really want me more, or there was a bit of like unsureness about whether he was interested in me that kept me on the hook for a while. And then when we started to get to know each other a little bit better, I had to fight against some of my instincts that are basically that, like, yearning is not healthy love. Like, there's something about yearning that I will always want, but I can find that in my career of striving for things. I don't have to have that in my romantic relationship, and I can accept somebody else's attention, and it can be a bi-directional caring. And I think I had conflated love with yearning, and maybe they're not the same thing, and it took me a long time to realize that.
Well, I can definitely relate to the distinction between bi-directional love and what could potentially either be one-side yearning or just the general notion of yearning or seeking. And I also hear you that can be something that you can feel in a career or in a passion, that since it's not a living being, it's the fact that it might be something that's difficult to attain. It's nothing personal. So in addition to that, that's a big thing, and I appreciate you sharing that, Jen. So do you find that there is a connection between that potential romantic stability and professional productivity?
Yes, for sure. So I'm an academic clinical psychologist, which means that I am primarily a faculty member doing research and teaching and training therapists. But I also am a licensed clinical psychologist. I have a part-time private practice where I see adults and clients, and adults and couples, sorry. And for me, having stability in my romantic relationship, and not just stability, but support. So I come home and my husband has dinner ready. I'm like a man from the 50s. The children have been picked up from school. They've had a snack. The house is clean. Dinner's on the table. The laundry's folded. And I don't have to stress about any of that because I know that that's happening. And so when I'm at work, I can focus on work. I can put myself entirely into that, and I don't have to. I have to put mental energy towards, vacation planning, or if the kids are sick, like being worried about them. But I don't have to feel unstable at home, and that allows me a lot of latitude in being able to focus my attention on what I want to when I'm at work.
That sounds like a very fulfilling career and home life. Man from the 50s. Now, I'm interested. I don't know how much of this podcast you've checked out, but sometimes over the years, I've had a lot of performers on the podcast, particularly from the improv space, and maybe not in this second necessarily, but I'm wondering if you'd be open to experimenting with like an improvised monologue of just exploring that idea of a man from the 50s, and what that person might sound like, and if they were to give some sort of monologue about life in the 50s. I don't think we should necessarily do it this moment, but just out of curiosity, let's bookmark that idea of like potentially if you ever wanted to explore kind of like some, I guess, the the therapeutic term might be role play, although I still like the word improv. But I think what you said, the life you described, sounds really great to me. And so you have a private practice where you see a few clients, and some of those are couples therapy as well.
Yep, I do. I see couples and individuals.
Mm-hmm. What is the path like to getting? So did you get a master's in social work, a master's in psychology, and then you have to get certified, right? What is the process there?
Yeah, so kind of picking up a little bit where I left off before. Once I decided that maybe theater wasn't the thing, and maybe therapy was appealing to me, I was working at that time as a staff member at the University of Minnesota, and I had free classes. So I started taking classes in psychology, including abnormal psychology, where I learned about different mental disorders, found that fascinating. And I ended up getting enough coursework that I had the equivalent to a bachelor's degree in psychology. And so I applied to grad school for a PhD in clinical psychology. Psychology is a little bit weird compared to other fields because you typically go to grad school to get a PhD. You can get a master's in psychology, but there's not a master's level license in psychology. The license is for a PhD level practitioner. So a lot of programs will admit people who have a bachelor's degree, and then you earn a master's in psychology along the way, but you don't have to reapply for the doctorate. You're just in school. So I got lucky. Clinical psychology is one of the hardest graduate programs to get accepted to. It's like clinical psych and vet school, I think. So I happened to get lucky the year that I applied, and I got in. I probably shouldn't have, but I did. And I spent 7 years in graduate school, learning to do therapy and psychological assessments. And then we have a 1-year internship at the very end of grad school where we have to work full-time in a counseling center or a hospital or something doing active clinical work. And I did my internship in Albuquerque, which is where I met my husband. And after you finish your PhD, you can then work towards getting licensed, which involves, in most states, doing some extra clinical work, kind of accumulating hours that are supervised. And then you can take an exam and then get licensed as a clinical psychologist.
And just to sort of pick up also on that other thread, this was husband number one?
My husband number one I met in college, and we split when I was in grad school. So he moved to Chicago with me, which is where I went to grad school, and then we split my third year of grad school. Okay,
all right. So this towards the end of grad school, you met them. I guess what I'll refer to as the more stable situation.
Yes.
Okay. So I still am really, this being a mental health podcast, I want to hear about your book, and we could go right there, but I also am always interested in the personal stories of the people. A lot of my guests are people who they're out about their addictions or their mental illnesses. So I suppose I would be remiss if I didn't kind of follow up on this thread of your personal journey with psychology, specifically with respect to this aspect of the part of you that wanted that longing romantically versus the part of you that wanted that stability, and how that journey coincided with your professional development, I guess I'll start I'll just tiptoe delicately into this. And how did you meet your current husband?
Online. OkCupid.
Oh wow, OkCupid. All right. What was it about his profile that made you want to connect, and who reached out first? Give me a little bit of the story there.
Yeah, he claims, we have an ongoing little debate about this. He claims that he'd seen my profile and was going to contact me, but I contacted him. Mm-hmm. I thought he had a kind-looking face, and he name-dropped Liz Lemon in his profile, and I thought that was, and that he really likes turn signals, and I really like turn signals. It really annoys me when people don't use turn signals. And he said he liked Halloween, and I love Halloween. And so he had been drawn to a picture of mine where I'd bought these contacts that turned my eyes into spades. I went as the Queen of Spades. And it was a creepy looking picture, but he thought it was really cool. And so I wrote him because seemed like he had similar interests to me.
Nice. And this would have been in what city would this been in at this point?
This was in Albuquerque.
Okay, in Albuquerque. Yes, you mentioned that. At that point, at what point did you get a sense that this was, I'm going to use this and let me know if this is not accurate, but at what point did you get a sense that this was different than your first marriage in terms of there being a healthy bi-directional sense of that he was maybe as into you as you were into him, and that was satisfying to you, if that's the case?
Well, there's some context here, I think. One
Sure.
is that the person who I dated right before him on OkCupid was kind of the opposite. He was super into me, and that was very uncomfortable. I did not like that, but I did it first. So I remember coming into my office one day and telling my office mate that I was just obsessed with this new guy, and she thought I was off my rocker. And then pretty quickly I realized that he was really intense and really into me, and that it was attractive at first but felt unsustainable to me. So I had broken it off with that guy. At the time, I was also kind of fooling around with a fellow intern of mine who was in a relationship with someone else. And so I got that yearning piece about kind of wanting more from that friend I was fooling around with. Mm-hmm. And so I think because I had just come from a place where someone was really into me and I didn't like that, and I was also had been with fooling around with somebody who was not that into me, but I think was using me as something to do on the off times of not working. When I met my husband, or now husband, he was a little awkward, and we got along when we were drinking, but not as much when we were not drinking. We didn't not get along, it was just awkward. He worked nights, and we would chat on GChat and would talk on the phone when he was on a break, and it was just awkward. And so it was a slow start. I feel like a lot of relationships I've been in have been pretty heavy at the beginning, kind of, a lot of infatuation, and this really wasn't. It was a lot of, I remember telling him on our second date, hey, I'm in Albuquerque for a year, and then I'm leaving. I don't know where I'm going yet, but I'm going to try to get a job. I most likely won't be here. And so I'm kind of here to have a good time, and I'm not looking for anything serious. Mm-hmm. And so we had this relationship at the beginning that was intentionally not serious and pretty casual. Mm-hmm. And then we met in September, and around Thanksgiving of that year, actually it was Thanksgiving weekend, he sat me down for a state of the relationship conversation. And he said, I really want to get married someday, and not to you.
Wow.
And that actually was maybe the best thing he could have said to me, because
Sure.
I had been worried that he was like too into me. And I was like, oh, great. He's not into me. We're going to just keep doing this thing until one of us finds something better to do or until I leave. And it took all the pressure off. His best friend told that story at our wedding, and she basically said, anyone who is going to respond to that, well, you're clearly meant to be together.
How much later was it that you got married after that conversation?
A year and a half. That was in November at Thanksgiving. But 6 months later, he had decided to move with me from Albuquerque to Arkansas, where we live now. So 6 months later that we got engaged.
Wow. That's very cool. Now he is, he's like kind of Mr. Mom right now. Does he have a career as well at the moment?
No, he's a stay-at-home dad. He was a copy editor for a newspaper when we lived in Albuquerque, and he's worked a little bit since we've been here, but mostly he's been taking care of the house and then taking care of the kids.
And you have 2 kids, is that right?
They're almost 8 and almost 11.
Wow. I was just Facebook stalking you a little bit and saw that you guys had recently taken a trip to Chicago and hit some of the Chicago sites.
Yep.
Some of the classics. What is your... I'm just about ready to dive into the book. Do you use... So you mentioned this notion that is really interesting to me of approaching your own personality or a client's personality as in some ways a character in a story. Am I sort of on a right track with that notion in terms of the characteristics that a character might have and kind of make how you define your own character despite how you might have maybe originally been written, that you get a chance to adapt your own character and create your own life, even if one might look at it as born into certain, some could say like character defects or things that aren't adaptive for you, and that you can kind of rewrite your character. Does this jive with whatever some of the things that you feel or write about? Yeah,
I think it's a little bit different for me now that I teach courses on personality and emotion. So that's some of what I do and some of what I study. So for me now, it's a lot about using my knowledge of psychology to understand a person, including reflecting on myself. And I think we all have aspects of ourselves that we dislike or might consider character defects, and skills that we don't have that we wish we had. But I'm really on a acceptance kick right now. So I think it's less about trying to change your personality or drop the parts of yourself that you don't like, and more about finding ways to accept the parts of yourself that you don't like and how to make those work for you.
And getting to the book now, what is, if you could put into, let's say I'm reading your book and you could use either information that you know about me or a hypothetical person. What, if I read your book, what is 1 or 2 takeaways or impacts that the book could have on my life as a reader? And you could include like who the audience might be, whether it's for people who are working on something or whether it's an academic person. What would you like the reader to take away from reading your book?
The book is not intended for an academic audience. It's intended for everyday people. Mm-hmm. And the metaphor of the book is that emotions are messages, right? That they're trying to tell us something. And emotions can feel scary. They can feel like junk mail, right? So people often see an emotion and they try to toss it without really looking at it because they're scared of what they might see. Or they might ruminate about it, put a postcard from an election last year under their pillow and not let go. And neither of those are particularly helpful. So what I want people to get out of the book is that emotions have purpose and they have value, but it can be hard to listen to what the emotions are trying to say when you've spent a long time feeling like they don't make sense, or they come out of the blue, or they're uncontrollable, or they're useless. And so this book tries to teach people what we know from a scientific perspective about emotion in a way that people can apply to their everyday lives. They can use it as a way to reflect and work on themselves to try to make emotions seem less daunting, less unfriendly, right? I want people to befriend their emotions. Open the message, read it, look at it, then decide whether it's helping or not.
Do you get a sense these messages, these emotional messages, do you, if they're messages, do you feel in some ways like they are being sent from somewhere intentionally?
Yes. So there's a whole chapter about that. This is the one chapter of the book that deviates a little bit from science because we don't know exactly where emotions are coming from. We know how they're generated, but we don't know who's sending the message. So in the book, I talk about how emotional messages are sent from people's values. And that's because we do know that it's impossible to have an emotion about something you don't care about. So when people care about something, their emotions tend to be stronger. People can certainly have an emotion in a situation that they don't care about, right? You could be walking down the street and trip on your shoe. This has happened to me recently. And, feel really, really irritated. Well, you don't maybe really care about that shoe or what's going on in the sidewalk, but there is something that matters that might have been triggered in your mind or on a baseline of already feeling bad that day. So I do think that understanding where the message is coming from, that there's something of value underneath it, helps emotions feel friendlier. If I feel anxious because I don't feel safe, that value of safety is sending me the message of anxiety. It's saying something's dangerous, you're in trouble. And that value of safety matters even when it's sending the message at a time where you're not actually threatened, there is nothing dangerous, but your value is trying to help you. Just like your emotions are trying to help you, but kind of like a toddler who wants to be helpful, right? Your kid wants to help you cook and they don't know how to do it and they're misguided. Your emotions can be too, but that doesn't mean that they're not trying to help and they're coming from a good place.
So let's put me in a situation here where I am, because I can understand the story of the toddler and I can understand the story of stubbing your toe or tripping on the street. Those to me are absolutely situations where I feel like in my understanding of those situations, what it sounds like is that there's there's an emotion that the individual is feeling, but the weight of it is coming from a deeper place, correct? The toddler is wanting to help you cook, but is the emotion that they're feeling of wanting to help cook, is it that there's more there, like it's actually, you just spoke about values. Is it also that they value attention from their parent? Is it also that they want to seek validation from their parent? These emotional values, I want to dig into those a little bit more. And if you apply this when you're with a client, and you mentioned it's just one chapter in your book, but I'm really curious about where these messages might be coming from, and the idea that they might be coming from our values. Is there a way, speaking example, just with the toddler who wants to help the parent cook, what value or source, is there a value or source that this emotion could be coming from that is not simply the value of, oh, I want to help my parent create a meal, that's just simply something I value? Or is there a deeper side to what that value could be?
So I was using the metaphor of the toddler cooking as sort of the emotion trying to get your attention, right?
Okay.
But it could be trying to get your attention. It's what's underneath that emotion that is the value. So when I work with a client, I might have them do some kind of values clarification activity. There's one in the book in chapter 3, where I have them sort of pick what their values are. And then when an emotion comes up, we might talk about, okay, so like, let's say, for example, let's say I have a client who's really annoyed with a coworker, and she's complaining a lot about this coworker who doesn't come to work on time and takes up a lot of air in the office. And my client's finding herself like more and more irritated and not able to focus on her work because she's annoyed with this coworker. So we might talk about like where that's coming from, where that annoyance is coming from. And we might unpack that by saying, okay, so annoyance is in the anger family. That's a feeling of frustration, irritation, annoyance. Anger is about something being some kind of injustice, right? Something, your rights are being violated in some way. And so what exactly, or that there's some unfairness. So if you're feeling annoyed, something feels like unfair. What is it that feels unfair? What is it that matters in your life that is being kind of pinged or triggered by this situation? And she might look at her values list and say, well, it really feels like I'm being disrespected because I care a lot about respect, and like she's not coming in on time and I am. And so that feels unfair. She's not respecting the fact that other people are doing their jobs. And then she's like talking all of the time and not letting me do my work, which also feels disrespectful. And so by understanding that this situation is prompting annoyance, and that is coming from this deeper value of disrespect, or respect really, can help her understand why she's feeling the way that she's feeling, and that her feelings make sense, that they're not stupid, that they're not like unwarranted. And then she can figure out what she wants to do with that.
Do you feel like these values, such as the value of wanting to be respected, do you feel like these values, or if it's relevant to explore this, where these values come from in terms of, are they something that is instilled in childhood? Are some of these formatted or strengthened by experiences that people have had earlier in their life, growing up, formative experiences For example, let's say someone had a loss early in their life or had a difficult childhood. Do you look at the potential connection between a value that might be very strongly held and getting to is there a benefit to getting to the root of maybe where the strength of that value comes from, and exploring the potential for, in this situation of the person at the office who is being disrespected, is there a part of the emotional journey / regulation that involves exploring what potentially might have happened in this person's life that is like, well, and this is a particular hot button for you because of, that they are like, well, I was disrespected by, my parents when I was growing up in this moment, and so it kind of underscores in a triggering sort of way, potentially, if someone disrespects you later. Does past experiences play into our current emotional sensitivities?
Oh, for sure. There's not a lot of science that I'm aware of on how values develop, but I have thoughts on it, which are namely that people's values often come from some of them could be, personality based, right? Some people value creativity or curiosity, and that's kind of just a part of who they are. But most of the time, I think values are probably instilled from early childhood experiences. And I mean that in two ways. One, that a lot of people pick up values from their parents and their caregivers, right? So people who care about respect and loyalty and tradition often have parents who care about those things too, because values are very much related to morals, which get implicitly taught through religion and just the way that people and politics and what people think is crucial. The other way that development and early childhood experiences can affect values is people start to value things that they didn't have or that were taken away. So I've worked with clients who've experienced significant trauma, and they often value security and safety because they didn't have it growing up. I've had clients who grew up really poor, and they value wealth because they didn't have that growing up. And so, or things like stability and control, when people come from chaotic backgrounds, they can learn to value the things that they wish they'd had and didn't. So I think those are the two main streams, having not studied this empirically, but having thought about my own clients. I think that those are the two streams I'm thinking of the most in terms of how values develop. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely, yeah. In terms of valuing, putting a premium on things that you don't have in your childhood. So that was one of the takeaways I had from what you're saying. You grow up in a lack of money. You maybe money grow up maybe poor. You put a higher premium on money. You're growing up with maybe less of an ability to control your own destiny. You put a higher premium on that. Is there another nuance to it that I'm glazing over too much?
Well, I think that it's either you kind of
and you also mentioned
values that were given to you, or you. Right. It's like you adopt them or you reject them, right? Yeah. So someone who grows up really religious, right? And like the Footloose family, right? You're not allowed to dance. Yeah. You can either take that as like, well, this is who I am. Like, I am someone who cares about tradition and kind of trying to and respect and doing what my elders tell me to do. And therefore, I am going to also adopt these religious moral values and not dance because that's what's important to me. Or you can get the, like, I don't, fuck that. I'm going to not like, I want freedom, I want independence. I do not want to listen to these things that other people have told me. So it feels like it's one of those two sides, and it could be both for a given person depending on the value. You adopt some of the values that your parents have given you, and you reject and move away from others.
In your story, Jen, are there values that you were raised with that you have footloosed yourself away from? And are there values that you that remain entrenched in your lifestyle today?
Yeah, for sure. A lot of my values are around openness to change. And so I'm fiercely independent. That's one of my values. I also value curiosity, creativity, purpose. And I feel like I got a lot of those from my mom in particular. My mom is a creative type herself. She was a singer, voice teacher. She's still doing theater, community theater right now. And so those sort of like the creativity kind of exploration pieces were definitely instilled in me by my parents. Even my dad, who's a kind of computer programmer, there can be some creativity and problem solving with programming. He was one of the first people involved with Play-Doh, right? Trying to do initial social media kinds of conversations. You can forge new ground with technology. I definitely have veered away from some of the more kind of respect and tradition I don't have a lot of values around having to keep things the same or having to listen to the in-group. We went to church growing up because my mom was paid to sing. And so I was sort of told that was something I was supposed to do, like attend church and care about that, but I didn't ever really care. I can't think of a specific value that I rebelled against, but I do think that I would be willing to rebel against a value if it didn't work for me because of my independence and kind of wanting to forge my own path is so strong.
Was your upbringing, given your mom's connection and singing in the church, did you go to church regularly? Did you grow up a believer?
I went to church regularly some of the time, but not all of the time. I dropped out of confirmation in like 9th grade because it was getting in the way of plays and auditioning for theater in high school. I just told my mom I didn't really care about that. And I think she was disappointed that I wasn't going to be confirmed, but it wasn't something that I really cared about. So I went, but I was never really in it.
Does religion play a role in your life today?
No, I would consider myself agnostic. I worked with plenty of clients who see themselves as religious, and I very much respect the value that religion and spirituality bring to people's lives. And for me, I don't know what's out there. I think I'm such a scientist that it's hard, you can't prove the existence of God, but you can't really disprove it either. And so because of that, I don't know. My own spiritual journey, I tend to think that maybe that will catch up to me at some point, and that will be something I will want to explore, I don't know, in my 50s or 60s as I get older, kind of figure out exactly where I stand. But for right now, I'm pretty comfortable in this space of not knowing. You
mentioned and have brought up a couple times actually in this interview, the premium value that you place on data.
Yeah.
How do you feel about data, and do you feel like there is a trend lately in America or otherwise with respect to how people respect or don't respect so-called data?
There's all different kinds of data. So I think there's definitely a trend towards disrespecting scientific data. And I get it to some extent because data often involves averaging a lot of people, right? We're going to put a bunch of people in a trial and we're going to give them a drug or a therapeutic technique, and then we're going to measure on the other end how they feel or how it worked, right? Whether that's a blood test or, in my world, it's more self-report measures. And I think people are skeptical of some of those averages not applying to them, which is true. They don't. Averages are averages. They don't necessarily say anything about any given person. I also think that people are very skeptical of social science, right? Measuring emotion is really hard. There's a weird, what I'm seeing in my field is sort of a weird bifurcation of people wanting the science to be legitimate, and so wanting to get more medical data on, brain functioning, neurotransmitter functioning, psychophysiology, heart rate variability, that kind of like data that feels really scientific, and mistrusting the fuzzier data that we might ask someone about their feelings. How do you feel from 0, not at all, to 10, extremely? People might not see that as reliable or a valid way to measure things. So, yeah, I think it's data is a tricky thing because it's often the skepticism makes sense to me from an individual perspective, right? That data doesn't always apply to someone's individual experience, and yet it also doesn't mean that the data is wrong. And that the individual experience is wrong either. Like, both can be true. They're just at different levels of analysis.
So I've got a sense, thank you for sharing that. I've got a sense for a couple chapters in the book, maybe, where the messages are sent from. That one was, and also the notion of regulating and how you deal with the strength of the messages and the potential takeaway that someone could potentially have from reading, how to, I using this word not in a correct way probably, but how to, I'm just saying, like, compartmentalize these emotions, but it's not probably the word you would ascribe to it, but what are some other chapters or themes of the book that now it's not written for academics, and is there data in the book? Is there studies things suggest, or is it also written from a perspective of I'm a practicing doctor in this field. Here's some anecdotal experiences I've observed from clients or in life, given that it's written for the every person. How much of the communication in the book is based on data and studies, and how much is based on, I guess, Jen's philosophies, experiences?
There's some of both in there for sure. I tried to anchor the book in what the science says, right? Mm-hmm. So there's a chapter, for example, on emotional awareness. What does it mean to be aware of your feelings? What are the problems that can crop up when people are not aware?
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to dig into the science and explain it in a clear way.
What might be, jumping into that, sorry, there's always a lag on these calls. What might be a concrete example of something that, is there an example in the book or one you can think of, like, okay, someone got angry, and what is the takeaway of the intervention or the choice they can make if they're feeling anger? I know you brought about the example of someone in the office, but if you wouldn't mind getting in the book, I take it you use, even though it's based on science that might be more generalized, I assume the reader would be treated to specific anecdotes from a hypothetical person, correct?
Yeah, there's hypothetical people. There's amalgamations of past clients. One of I include myself in there too. There's definitely one of the chapters. The example is me. So yeah, for sure, there are examples throughout, because I think just hearing about the science doesn't help people if they don't know what to do with it. So I try to describe how a client or how a person might grapple with that content to get greater understanding or skill that improves their lives.
I'm definitely interested in the chapter on you. Do you share about your romantic attachment situation? Do you share about other aspects of your life? What's in the Jen chapter?
The Jen chapter, well, the example of me is in the chapter on emotional awareness, where I start the chapter by talking about when I was applying for graduate school and had several what I know now are panic attacks and what I refused to acknowledge were panic attacks at the time. Mm-hmm. Right? So the chapter starts with me talking about how in 2004 I was sitting in a parking lot. I don't even remember what parking lot I was in or why I was there, what I was waiting for. And I had this experience where my heart started racing, my face got flushed, and I was worried I was having a heart attack. I was in my early 20s, so that seemed unlikely. But it took, 20 minutes for that to kind of go away, and I was super freaked out that there was something physically wrong with me. And so I went to the I think emergency room, and they did an EKG and everything was fine. And they asked me, have you been stressed about something? Is this a panic attack? And I was really arrogant. I was like, no, I'm applying for graduate school in psychology. I would know if this was a panic attack, which I'm a little embarrassed about now that I said that, but I did. And it wasn't until later that I realized that definitely was a panic attack, and I was paying attention to the physiological, the physical pieces of the emotion, but I wasn't paying attention to the other pieces. And as I was writing the book, I realized one of the things I talk about in the awareness chapter is people who struggle with awareness of their emotions. There's a word for that. It's called alexithymia. Have you heard that before?
No, being educated right now.
Yeah, so alexithymia is not a disorder. It's kind of a style of someone who struggles to understand their feelings, struggles to put a name to their feelings, often doesn't have a particularly big fantasy life that often goes along with it. And so people who are high in alexithymia tend just not to be very aware of their feelings. If they are aware, it was sort of like what I was experiencing. They're aware of the physiological elements. They're aware that their body's activated, but not that there's an emotional piece to it.
You mentioned that the word is alexithymia.
Uh-huh.
You mentioned that people who have that to a degree, they don't have as rich a fantasy life, you said. What is the role in your opinion, of a fantasy life? What do you mean by that? And how, and what are the benefits of that?
I don't entirely know. That's just what some of the literature says on alexithymia. One of the characteristics that they often find is that people who are high in alexithymia tend to be very logical, not very fantastical, right? Tend not to daydream, things like that. And I wonder if some of that has to do with emotions are very visual, and the emotions tend to be activated more deeply through visual imagery, right? And so if somebody doesn't have a big visual imagery sketch pad in their mind, or they aren't daydreaming like that they might not feel as many emotions, right? We can have emotions generated from things we experience, but also from our own memories and thoughts and dreams. And so it might make sense that someone who's high in alexithymia doesn't experience as many emotions like that. And when they do experience emotions, they really aren't aware of where they're coming from or how to describe them.
I want to get back for a second to that experience of being someone studying psychology and then having something psychological happen that might be have a diagnosis to it, like a panic attack, and a feeling of what might be I'm a fraud if I'm studying this, but I couldn't have possibly had a panic attack. I study these things. How could they affect me?
It wasn't that how could it affect me, it's I would know. I would be able to recognize it if it were me.
I see. Okay. I see now. Okay. A difference there for sure. So how long did it take you to write the book, and at what was there a moment when it's your first book? Yes.
Yeah.
What was the journey like of hey, I've got some stuff I want to say. How did it happen? How did you go from someone who hadn't written a book to someone who decided they wanted to write a book to actually writing the book?
Well, as an academic, I write papers all the time, but those are academic audience papers. So but the writing process is familiar to me. This book came about in part because I was working with a graduate student, trying to teach someone how to be a therapist. And I offhandedly mentioned, I don't even remember what it was, some kind of technique that she could try that was based in the science of emotion. And she said, wait, hold the phone. There's a science of emotion? And I was like, whoa, how does a psychology graduate student not know that there is a science of emotion? I wouldn't expect her to know things from that, because psychology is huge, right? We have tons of different subfields within psychology, but this was a clinical psych grad student. And so I was like, yeah, there's a huge science of emotion. And she said, okay, well, is there a book I can read that will kind of teach me the basics of emotion? And I was like, no. There are a couple of books. They're super neuroscience based and not kind of more on towards the self-help sphere. And so that conversation with her was several years ago, but it was like a worm that got into my brain and didn't leave. And I thought, someone should write that book that explains how emotions work and what the science of emotion regulation is in a really understandable way, not just for therapists, but for everyday people. Someone should do that. And then 2 years ago, I had a sabbatical, which is basically I don't have to teach or go to meetings for a semester. I can focus on my writing. And I thought, well, someone's going to write this book. I mean, if no one else is going to do it, I guess it should be me. I could do that. I have the expertise to write this book. So I put together a book proposal. I submitted it in a little over 2 years ago, and they loved it, and I got a contract to write the book. And then it took me about 6 months to write the whole book. And then another several months after I got some feedback on it to do rewrites. So it's been about 2.25 years since I submitted the proposal, between that time and the time the book was published in July.
If you could speculate out to the impact the book might have on other people as well as your own life or practice, what are some scenarios there of how the book could make a difference in yours and other people's lives?
I mean, practically speaking, I can recommend the book to clients. We could talk about the ideas in it. I teach courses on emotion. I can have students read it, hope that they'll pass it on to their family members, at the end of the semester. Really, for me, what matters most is trying to get some of this information about emotions that's out there. If you go onto TikTok or other forms of social media, there's a lot of misinformation about how emotions work, how to best regulate them. We don't get an emotion class in school. We're supposed to just pick this up on our own. There are increased diagnoses of autism and mental health concerns, which are all around emotion. So if people understood their feelings better, maybe that's not going to solve all the mental health problems for sure, but it could help prevent some of them.
Well, at this point, I want to get, if you have time, I know you mentioned you didn't have a ton of time, but I still, this notion of, well, if people understood the signs of emotions, we could really deal with a lot of problems that are not properly being dealt with now without the power of the science of emotions. If you could step up on a soapbox for a second, and not necessarily a soapbox, but what are some misconceptions about emotions that are going around on social media or otherwise that you could dispel people from, and educate us, or me specifically, on what are some misconceptions about emotions and regulating emotions, and what is the potential that understanding my emotions, how can that really make a difference and impact in my day-to-day living and my future goals and achieving them?
That's a big question.
Saved it for the end.
I'm going to echo what I said a little bit earlier, that I think people are scared of their feelings. My sense is that people consider their emotions more like monsters. So an example that I often give is, have you seen Harry Potter or read the Harry Potter books?
I saw the first one in the theaters when it came out back in the early 2000s, but I would probably opt out of a Harry Potter metaphor just because I really am not very educated in it. So if there's another way of describing it...
Well, it doesn't matter because I can describe I'm just sort of... It's from the first one anyway. So...
okay, all right.
In the first, when Harry Potter gets a letter from Hogwarts, he's this 11-year-old kid. A letter comes in and he's not been treated very well in his family. And he gets this letter telling him that he's a wizard and invited to Hogwarts. But he doesn't actually get that letter right away, because what happens is the letter comes in and his uncle sees the Hogwarts name on the envelope, takes it from him and throws it in the fire. Because that emotional message was really scary. He didn't want that, right? He doesn't want anything to do with Hogwarts as the demon wizardry place. And so then the next day, 2 letters appear, because that message from Hogwarts really wanted to be received. And his uncle again throws them away. And the messages increase over time because he tries to throw them out, And the message wants to be received so badly that a few days later, there are letters streaming in through the fireplace, and they've become like rain in the house, and they're flooded with letters. Well, I think emotions are like that too. Emotions are messages that want to be received, and if we try to ignore them and push them away, they just get stronger. Because they try to get our attention. That's where that toddler metaphor comes in again, right? The toddler, they don't get what they want, they're hungry, they're gonna scream. And so when we push our emotions away, they come back, and they come back stronger. A lot of people use control techniques or try to push their emotions away, but emotions don't really respond to the same kinds of problem-solving strategies that we use for other kinds of stuff. We need to feel our feelings to get the message, even if just a little bit, because only by looking at the message can we then decide what to do with it. And so if we don't give our emotions some attention and care, that is when they become problems. That is when they get really strong. That is when they take over. And there are some mental health conditions that I think don't follow that particular policy. But most of the emotions that people experience, including people with mental health conditions, like if we can just give them a little bit of attention and care and learn how to regulate, learn when our emotions are trying to help us and to listen to them, and when our emotions are trying to kind of misguide us, and those are the times we want to regulate, I think that would be great. Like then a lot of people out there would feel much better about their lives.
What is the top strategy for regulating an emotion? Let's say I'm me, for example, and I have a strong emotion of loss that might come sweeping in. My mother passed away when I was young, and let's say I still get things will happen to me, and I get an emotion might come in of anger about something, maybe disregarding the earlier trauma. Let's say I get here's a real practical one for me. I get really impatient and frustrated and angry when things don't happen as quickly as I want them to happen. Let's say I'm trying to get someone to understand how I feel about something, or for instance, I might see like, oh, here's how you're thinking about it, and I can just tell you right now that the way you're thinking about it, here's how you should be thinking about it, and hurry up and listen to me, because I'm getting frustrated trying to give you this information, or I'm getting frustrated for this car in front of me to drive faster. What is the regulation process? If I'm your client, if I'm just basically impatient, quick to anger, it's like, okay, well, I'm supposed to feel that anger. You're telling me I'm supposed to feel that anger. It's not healthy to suppress that anger, right? Mm-hmm. How do I cope with it?
Well, I think one of the biggest strategies that people don't think of as a regulation strategy is naming their emotion. So there's a line called "name it to tame it," and that is because labeling the emotion, kind of giving the emotion, attaching a word to it, when people do that, it actually starts to change the physiology in the brain. Naming an emotion is so powerful. It's like a regulation superpower, but it doesn't feel like you're doing anything. And so for a lot of people, there's actually a really cool study out there that shows that people feel much better when they label their emotion, but they don't think that they will. So people who think that they're going to have to label an emotion think that labeling is going to make them feel worse, but it actually makes them feel better. So I would say if you're feeling frustrated, to be able to say, man, I am feeling frustrated is the first step.
And say that in my head, or say that to whoever I'm with, or like, is that an inner monologue thing?
It depends on who you're with, but I would say that being able to express emotions out externally is important. I think depending on who you're talking to, that other person might see that as some kind of attack on them, and they might get defensive, and that might hurt the relationship. But there are plenty of people who could hear your frustration, and then that would help them slow down and shift and listen to you more if you're feeling like you're frustrated that you're not being heard or they're not picking things up, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one piece. Another piece with anger is addressing the physiological. So anger tends to come along with a lot of increased heart rate and increased muscle tension. And so taking some deep breaths can help so that people don't say things in anger, right? Anger itself, it's just an emotion that's telling you that something feels unfair or unjust. But acting on anger, whether it's venting or lashing out or, yelling at somebody else, it's when it comes out often through these nonverbal channels that anger is toxic. But having anger is okay. Anger can also be, if you have anger, then reflecting to yourself later about how a lot of people are angry when they have rules about the world that they think are being violated. And so I would also ask you, if you were my client, we would talk about okay, well, what is this rule that people are supposed to listen to you? That might be a respect value, but why would we expect that everyone else would have that? So you have a rule, you have a value, but other people don't. So maybe we need to work on allowing other people to have different values and rules about the world than we do.
Do you, in your life, have you seen a therapist yourself for different periods in your life?
Yeah, all related to relationships. I saw a therapist in undergrad when I was dealing with a boyfriend who's gay, which he didn't admit that at the time, so that made sense. And then in grad school after my divorce, during and around my divorce, I saw a therapist for a year. Yeah.
If someone were an aspiring therapist, what would be 2 or 3 tips that you might give them, even in the vein of techniques to be listening, or techniques to deliver the information? For example, when you deliver that information, I've been in therapy for 20 years plus, and your technique of the way you explained, well, maybe there's a value that you have of everyone needs to understand and listen to me. Maybe, let's think about that, maybe not everybody has that value. And so maybe that's not helping you to believe that that is the case. That style that you explained that to me was very, really touched me. I don't mean emotionally I was moved, but in a way I was, but it was very well stated and crafted. And I know you said you train therapists as well. So when you train people to be a therapist, what are either the top 2 techniques or tricks of the trade that you might impart onto somebody?
The first one's probably the skill that we teach new therapists first thing, which is how to actively listen, right? So how to tune in and reflect back what you heard somebody else say so that they feel understood, right? To me, that's the home base of therapy. If you can do that, if you can really listen, pull out the crux of what a person is saying, and that does take some effort sometimes because people ramble, right? They monologue. So having to pull out like, okay, what was the most important thread here? That can take some practice. And then saying it back to the person, and did I get that right? I heard this kind of feeling, like listening for the feeling and being able to reflect that back. That's a home-based therapy skill. When people don't know what to do, when they don't know what piece of psychoeducation to pull out, when they don't know what intervention to do, if they can just listen and be there with someone in their pain and without judgment of that pain, but be able to, I think sharing your pain with somebody else, the other person takes it on a little bit. And if you can show your client that you're taking on a little bit of their pain and that you can handle it and they're not too much, that can go a long way. I don't know if you felt like that in your own therapy, that when somebody can just be there with you, that's meaningful.
Absolutely. Well, I like that. I mean, that definitely sounds like that sounds like a must do. That reflect active listening and reflecting back what you're hearing. Is there, when you're training people, is there a dial for how much in that reflective language there is like a subtext of like, is there, how do you, it seems to me almost like there could be some acting involved in being a therapist, not only just in terms of being a good listener, but also when you deliver back that reflective language, there seems to be some subtext in the way that you say it that is in some ways like, one subtext might be like, oh, you might want to examine that because that might not be the best way to think about it. Or another subtext might be, I'm hearing this and that makes me think that you really have a handle on that. And that sounds like something that I've heard you kind of discover over the past few sessions. I'm affirming what it sounds like you're believing here, and good for you, so there's different, I can imagine emotionally in your delivery of the reflective language that there could be subtext that is being communicated. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Subtext, and like everything that you just said, you could say directly to a client, and I have, and I would, right? Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of theater that shows up in therapy, especially with couples. I like to think of my training as a director as so useful for couples therapy, because in couples, a lot of what you're doing is trying to help people learn how to communicate. So there's a little bit of like, all right, give me your line. And then like, how do you respond? Oh, wait. Try saying that a different way. Try a new line. Okay, now how do you react? And so you're kind of taking a scene. It's very similar to working with actors, but there's no script. Sometimes you're giving them a script because sometimes people need to know what to say to validate their partner, or to really listen. And so I'm using a lot of those directing coaching skills with couples a ton. I think I use them. I like to use a lot of metaphors with my students and with couples as well. And that isn't theater exactly, but there's a creative aspect to it for sure.
Very cool. I'm glad you're still able to get concrete use out of the time that you've put into theater and directing. I
actually, a couple years ago, I wrote a short play for my students on what would it look like if the big 5 personality characteristics went to therapy, like group therapy. And I wrote it to like surprise them and do a dramatic reading in our last class of the semester. They thought I was bringing donuts, but instead I was bringing them a 10-minute play. And I actually submitted that to a play competition, and it's going to be performed in September in Sacramento, which is really cool.
Wow, that is awesome.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, I don't want to take up too much more of your time. Is there anything else that people should know about where to read that play, or any information about the book or any book tours coming up or anything like that?
There's nowhere to read the play right now. I would be open to posting the script about it after it's performed. I think they want it to be kind of the world premiere kind of thing.
Sure.
It's for new playwrights. So that's at the end of September. It's called Big Five Therapy.
What is it? One more time?
Big Five Therapy.
Big Five Therapy. Got it.
Have you heard of the Big Five personality characteristics?
I have not. Let's go into that just real quick if you can.
Oh, yeah, no, I've got time. So the neuroticism, OCEAN is the acronym. So openness to experience, conscientiousness, agreeableness, extroversion, and neuroticism are the personality traits that have been found repeatedly in people across ages and cultures that are thought to be the bedrock of people's personalities, right? If you had to distill them down to their core molecular elements, those would be the five, says some scientists. And so this is a play about if somebody over-identified with their central trait, right? If there was like the neurotic, right? We tend to sometimes over-identify with a disorder or trait. So if someone identifies as being organized and conscientious, and someone else identifies as being agreeable, someone else identifies as being kind of open and curious, someone else identifies as an extrovert, and you put those people in therapy, but do they help each other grow, or do they just reify those central traits and they don't actually help each other grow? So that's kind of the premise of this short play.
Wow, that's awesome. Which personality type are you?
Well, there are no personality types. That's one of the points of the play, that we all are made up of all of those traits to varying degrees.
I like that.
And so a lot of the existing measures like the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs or even the what Harry Potter house are you, or what, style are you, that give someone a category. That's just not how people work. Like, we are not one thing. We are multitudes. And so that's one of the things I wanted to convey in this play, that we shouldn't be typing ourselves or other people.
When I hear you say that we shouldn't be typing ourselves and other people, that you mentioned, does that give a sense for you of feeling do you feel any sort of, as a therapist, as an educator, and I know you mentioned you're more or less agnostic at this point. Do you feel at all, with your skill set as an educator, as an empathetic person, as someone who has knowledge about emotions, and this theory/belief sounds like that we are multitudes, as you put it. Does this at all feel to you as something that you feel called to express in some way, to get this information, this notion that we don't have to categorize ourselves in this way, we contain multitudes? Do you feel in some ways a calling to get this information out there?
Yeah. I'm not sure what the best way to do that is, but absolutely. The personality stuff is a lot of what I see on social media, of people using the word, of introvert or narcissist or borderline. And it feels really problematic to me. So I've been talking with, reflecting to myself and talking to some of my students about how to try to correct some of those misconceptions that people seem to have about typing themselves, and trying to help people understand why seeing themselves as a type it's intuitively appealing, because you can then find other people who are the same type as you and feel like you're part of a community. but it's also like literally boxing people in. And I think people are capable of understanding complexity. And by making things simple, we are not giving people the chance to feel, to acknowledge the complexity of human beings. And we're all complex, and that's okay.
Well, Jen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I wish you all the success with this book and also the play. I really like what you're saying in terms of that we can be more mindful of how we are individuals, and we don't have to just be Huff and Puff or Gryffindor. We have different aspects to us that don't have to just fall into these categories. Are you on a platform? I mean, this book. Are you using social media to promote this book? Are you messaging in any of these thoughts in the book? Are they a part of the book? This idea that people are maybe stuck in a rut in some ways online about feeling like, well, this is who I am. I'm in this category, so I'm just kind of stuck with it. I'm a borderline personality, or I'm a narcissist, or I'm a neurotic, or that's who I am. So you have to understand I'm in this box, and there's just nothing I can do about it. Are you using your platform to address that at all? Is that covered in the book?
The neuroticism piece is, to an extent, there's a whole section on what it means to be emotionally sensitive, and that people get a lot of negative feedback about sensitivity and how to push back on people who say you shouldn't be so sensitive. So there's some implications about how if people see themselves as too sensitive, that implies that there's a correct amount of sensitivity, which I think is wrong. So I'm starting a TikTok channel, but I'm trying to get a bunch of videos together before I start launching them. So that will be happening hopefully in the next couple of weeks. I've also started a blog at my website, which is jencveilleux.com. So I'm trying to put some of these ideas out there. I have an Instagram too, but I haven't done a whole lot with that one yet. But it's the same thing, Jen C. Veilleux. So I'm hoping to do that. Yeah, take some of these ideas and beliefs that I have, which are based in science, and put them out there to try to correct some of these misconceptions. That's my plan.
And what could be accomplished if your plan comes to fruition and people are following you and taking your advice and thinking about things more in the way that you are leading them to? What could be accomplished with that?
I mean, look, I'd be perfectly happy if, and I'm sorry to all my therapist friends here, but I'd be perfectly happy if people therapists had less clients, right? There's already too much mental health need. So that's a lofty goal that I do not think is accomplished by a TikTok channel or a single book. But I do think that if people can use some of the things that I'm talking about, there are almost certainly other stumbling blocks that people will encounter when trying the ideas that I've put forth in my book. And so I would hope that at the very least, this would start a conversation, that people would reach out to me and ask me a question, because maybe I'll write another book. There's probably other books to be had in this arena. And I think that helping people navigate their emotions more flexibly, more fluidly, more gracefully is it's a mission I really care about, because I think there's a lot of depression and anxiety and other kinds of problems out there that people aren't seeking help for or aren't getting good help for. And so if there are ways that people can learn some stuff that might help them help themselves, then that's great. Well,
that's really terrific, and I hope that I hope this book makes as much of an impact as you could hope for. Yeah, it's just been really nice to catch up with you. I again, it has been like 30 years.
Wild.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you again, Jen. I'll look forward to following your TikTok and your Instagram and keeping up with your journey. And thank you again so much for chatting with me.
Yes, thank you for having me.